got a wet fly here today I'm going to tie up. This is called the Greenwell's Glory. I became interested in this fly because a few months back I got a copy of a book by Ian Whitelaw, and it is The History of Fly Fishing in 50 Flies. Now, you're not going to be able to see the whole book in this little frame, so I'll put a picture of the book up there, and there will be a link in the description to a copy of this. But it's a fascinating book because it goes through the history of fly fishing and looking at it from the perspective of when certain flies came out, what was popular and what was used at a time. And the interesting thing is you get to see how a particular fly then evolved into other flies and then evolved into other flies and have led to some of the modern flies that we tie today. Now, the Greenwell's Glory is it's an old pattern. It was originally tied in 1854 by a gentleman by the name of James Wright. He was commissioned by William Greenwell after a frustrating day of fishing to tie basically the Greenwell's Glory. He described the insect that the fish were taking, that he wasn't catching it, he didn't have a pattern for, and James Wright was a well-known fly tyer at the time. So the next day he went out with it, had a very, very good day, and the next day, and eventually it led to this being called the Greenwell's Glory. The interesting thing about this book is that it takes you through some of the history of fly fishing with these flies, and you get to see how they evolve. You get to see popular patterns, popular people that nowadays, we tie to different flies and things. And it's just very interesting to get that history perspective. So this is the Greenwell's Glory. It is tied with a starling wing. The original was tied with blackbird, and the original also had a silver rib. This is tied with a fine gold rib. But pretty much the original wet fly is tied with this material, the Primrose silk, Pearsall silk, and a red and black Hackle fibers, or I should say Hackle. That's the Greenwell's Glory. I do highly recommend getting the book, The History of Fly Fishing in 50 Flies. That's the Greenwell's Glory, and I'll go ahead and get started. The Greenwell's Glory by placing my hook in the vise. This is a standard wet fly hook. This is a Mustad 3399 in a size 14. I'm going to go ahead and debarb the hook. A lot of your wet flies are usually in a larger size than this, but part of the problem that you're running into with using Starling for the wing on this is you're not getting real long barbs off the wings of starlings, so you're not getting into your size 10s and 8s and maybe even 6 wet flies. I am using a Primrose yellow Pearsall's silk, so I'm going to wax that to start the fly. I'm just going to run my my thread through the wax a couple of times. Then I'm going to run it through my fingers just to get any excess wax off and just to distribute it. This just helps the silk grip the hook better and grip the materials better. It can be rather smooth and a little slippery when tying some of these materials in. I'm going to attach my thread about an eye length behind the eye of the hook. Put a few wraps in to lock that in. The rib on this is a fine gold wire. As I had mentioned, the original version had a fine silver wire, but most of the Greenwell's Glories that are tied these days just have a gold wire. So I'm just going to stick with that. I'm going to take my wire and attach it to the hook on my side of the hook, and then advancing my tying thread down the hook shank. Just going to get a layer of silk along the hook shank to just past the point of the hook. Then I'll start wrapping on top of that layer, coming back up the hook shank. This is just to develop the body. You want to just have nice touching turns. Come back up to where I first started attaching the thread to the hook. I'll wrap my rib in. I get one wrap right at the end of the body, and then 5 evenly spaced wraps as I work my way up the body. My 6th wrap should come right up on the side of the hook, right where my thread is hanging. I'll get 3 wraps in to secure that. Tighten the bobbin up onto the hook, and then you can just twist away the wire. I'm going to clean this up just a little bit. Want to keep a nice smooth area up there for tying in our hackle as well as the wing. The hackle on this, the original calls for a red and black hackle, and I think from what I read, what they're talking about is a badgered hackle like this. This is a hen hackle. It has the black center to it and the reddish brown tips to it. And some in dry fly circles, these are also called furnace hackles off of a rooster. But this is a hen, and that's what I'm using for this, so that you get your kind of black and red colors in there. So I've pulled away the fluff and the parts I don't need from the feather, and I really only need to get about 3 or 4 turns of this hackle in. So I can hold this by the tip, stroking the fibers, I should say the barbs that I want, right here in about the middle section here. And I want a length that's going to be about, put it inside the gap of the hook. With those held back, I can cut the tip off and just leave that little triangle to tie in. There's my anchor. Try not to get too many wraps of this silk on here because it can build up very quickly. With my hackle pliers, I'll fold these back. I found that you're better off with this particular hackle not messing with this a lot. A lot of people will stroke this back a lot to try and get those all folded back. If you just get them folded and then just go ahead and wrap it in, if you mess with it a lot, for some reason, these particular hackles, they seem to get a little wilder. Smooth this off here for our wing. As I mentioned before, the wings nowadays generally are made out of starling. Now, the primary feathers for the starling generally are very, very short, meaning the barbs right here, very, very short. That's why you're tying on sizes 14s and 16s of this fly. But if you look at some of the secondary feathers, you can usually find some that have barbs that are a bit longer. And these are what I'm going to use for this size 14 here. You want to get a left and a right, and you're just going to cut your slips out and match those up. So I've got a couple slips here. The one on my side is just a little bit wider than the one on the opposite side. So I'm just going to reach in with my bodkin, peel out a couple of barbs there just to narrow that up a little bit. Like I said, this is a softer material than your standard flight feathers from, say, a mallard or a goose. So just be a little careful with it. I'm going to get these in position so that the tips are just past the bend, maybe about a quarter to half a shank length. I'll do a pinch wrap. I'll make certain I get a nice pinch wrap back at the back of the head space and not at the front. Put in a couple wraps to secure it. And then we take a look at it. That turned out pretty well. It's nice and straight up and down on along the back here. Even though the feather does tend to tip off to one side, I think that will be fine. So we'll cut away the excess. And here you just have to be a little bit careful. We're wanting to cover those butt ends up and make the head of the fly, but we don't want to make the head too big. I'm actually going to unwrap and try and trim that down just a little bit more. You know, you can always do this when you're tying if you're not getting the results you want in a certain step, either with the materials or the thread, whatever it is. You can always unwrap things back to a certain point and then start over again to get it the way you want it to be. So now, got that one spot right there. There we go. So now I don't want to wrap any more on there. The head's big enough. So I'm just going to take my whip finish tool and put it in a 3 or 4 turn whip finish. And then I will use the whip finish wraps here to more or less finish off the head. If you don't have the Pearsall silk, which is kind of a traditional wet fly tying thread, that's fine. Just use any kind of yellow. And as I said, the original pattern had a black head on it, not just the yellow. Take some head cement. I'm going to put just a half a drop. And this can soak up pretty easy up into those wings. So I like to just take a little bit on the sides of the heads. Otherwise it soaks up into that wing too much. And there is your Greenwell's glory. Very fascinating fly, just from the standpoint of when it was tied, other flies that have evolved from this fly. It's still today a very, very popular fly, especially in the UK. Very, very much loved fly. So I highly recommend you get the book by Ian Whitelaw, The History of Fly Fishing in 50 Flies. It's very, very intriguing. At some point, maybe tie yourself some Greenwell's glories. Thanks for watching. Thanks for joining me at Devise today. I hope you learned at least a new pattern, if not a new technique, maybe a tip or trick here and there. If you have any questions about this fly or any of the techniques used in constructing this pattern, please leave them in the comments section down below. If you go to the trouble to ask a question, I'll go to the trouble to answer it. If you'd like to help dressed irons, please share this video with your friends and anybody you think that might enjoy this pattern. Until next time, remember, it's fly tying. If you're not having fun, then you're doing it wrong.